There are just so many Roman games throughout the years that end up flying under the radar. While you do have your big hitters like Total War Rome 2 and the like, one of my favorite games for that time period is Colosseum Road to Freedom for the PS2. While I would love to tackle that gem one day, I would like to take a look at another Roman game with Field of Glory Empires. Developed by AGOT and published by Slitherine Limited, this 2019 grand strategy game saw moderate success and has a very positive rating on Steam with an 82% from about 600 reviews. Even though it lacks the budget of a Total War game, is it still worth checking out? Also, before we begin, I am playing with the Soul Persia DLC, so I will go over what that provides and I will make it a conscious effort to differentiate what is in the base game versus what is in the DLC. The base experience really isn't impacted a ton outside of a few changes, but I will still point it out once we get there. When you start a game, you can pick from one of a crap ton of factions starting in the year of 310 BCE. The campaign lasts all the way to 190 CE, so that gives the player 500 years to make their faction relevant, which translates to 500 turns. There's honestly a ton and it can be overwhelming, but thankfully this game does a great job establishing the scene of what is going on with each faction. They also provide hints for you on what your possible opening moves can be, which is great for new players. While I could go with a major player like Rome, Egypt, or even Carthage, I decided to go with the Gothones tribe, which is located far away in the north. I only have one territory and will need to start from the bottom, but I got time since I am a decent distance away from many potential threats. As a one territory faction, there isn't a ton that I can do, but we must take our first humble steps. Each territory you own has a certain population. Population increases with food production. Depending on the amount of people within a territory determines how many buildings that place can support. As a tribal horde, we get a minus 10% modifier to our infrastructure, meaning that it'll take longer to construct various buildings. Buildings are divided into food, health, infrastructure, military, wealth, and culture. Depending on the province and various other factors will determine the buildings that you can choose from. If you don't like any of them, you can reshuffle the building proposals to get a fresh selection next turn. It reminds me of many 4X games I've played over the years with a bit more randomness thrown in. My goal early on is to unite the province of Gothia Ulterior, which can grant us a unique unit to recruit. For this province, we can get the elite Gothic warband unit. The only way we can do this though is through conquest. Since we are attacking independent provinces, there is no need to declare war. There are two ways to solve combat. You can basically solve it in game, which is completely automated, or you can export the game into Field of Glory 2, which is what I often did for just how awesome this battle system is. Unlike games like Total War that offer a real-time battle system, Field of Glory 2 is completely turn-based. The battle ends when one side reaches 60% casualties or reaches 40% casualties while the other is at least 25% less than them. It sounds strange saying it, but it makes a lot more sense playing it. As expected, you position your troops before battle and can assign generals. These units usually perform better, but the general can be killed when engaged in combat. The combat is grid-based, so you will need to move your units grid by grid. Depending on the movement type, the terrain, and the traits of the units determine how far they can travel. Once your melee troops engage, they are locked in combat until either unit pulls back or is routed. To me, the battles are at their best when there are a ton of units on both sides. It's pretty awesome seeing the battle play out in a methodical pace as you observe the battlefield and try to reposition your troops accordingly. I've had many battles where one side of my units will dominate while the other side was barely hanging on. I had to try to send help as much as possible and hope that it led to a devastating flank attack. Just know that these large battles can be long, so I would recommend to set aside some time to get through them. One downside to these large battles, however, is keeping track of the units that have already performed in action. There is a list that is available to see who has moved yet, but it's a bit cumbersome having to scroll through a list just to make sure everyone has been accounted for. I wish there was a quick way to move to the next unit. There may be a hotkey somewhere, but I was unaware of one. Just like the faction variety, there is a huge plethora of units to play around with. As a Gothic/Germanic hybrid, I mostly relied on picking off units with my skirmishers, then having my infantry engage with the enemy. Eventually, I gained access to heavier cavalry as I advanced my government. However, this is only the tip of the iceberg of the units out there. You can play as horse archers, unique Roman and Greek units, chariots from the British Isles, and even freaking elephants, which are absolutely lethal in setting up a flanking attack. There's just a ton of variety of units and how each one ultimately performs. Exporting to play these battles is honestly really cool. Unfortunately, it does increase the cost of investment for the user if they want to go this route. I guess if you just want a pure auto-resolve system, then you don't need to get Field of Glory 2, but to me, you'll really lose out on the battle experience. There's just something to witnessing your army finally taking over that last piece of territory and utterly wiping your enemies from the map. It's an amazing and overall satisfying feeling. There are some limitations here, as naval battles and siege battles are not supported in Field of Glory 2. Therefore, you will need to rely on the generals and the unit composition more than anything else. This is a real shame since the engine seems to be capable of it. It would be awesome to play as Carthage as you desperately try to hold off the Romans from advancing, setting up a phalanx and holding as long as you can. Still, open field battles are well done here. Alright, so let's get back to Field of Glory's empires proper. When you take over a settlement, it will have negative modifiers that lower the loyalty and overall production of the city. If you have the Persian DLC, each territory may have an impediment that can be removed. This can be done with certain buildings or using regional decisions. These are awarded to the player every turn and can be used with a cost attached. Also use the Bolster Colony regional decision to help increase the population in my territory. Regional decisions are only included in the DLC, which is honestly a game changer to me. It gives the players so much more options on how to deal with certain factions, as well as with the development of their own. I've played the game without the DLC prior, so it's definitely not required, but it can help give the game a bit more substance. One of the biggest advertised features in this game is the decadence mechanic. As you control more territories, especially the ones far away from your capital, each place will accumulate decadence. This can be reduced by various buildings as well as from the traits of your leader. Depending on your historical culture value over decadence determines where you will be ranked amongst other nations. Being in the bottom third will accumulate decadence tokens, while being in the top third grants progress tokens. Getting 5 progress tokens levels up your nation into a glorious age, then ultimately into the next government type. Being a tribe, the next government type is tribal chieftain, followed by Tribal Confederation. Being a tier 3 civilization grants the most bonuses to a faction, as well as unlocking the best troops for that faction to recruit. I honestly like this mechanic, as even the AI factions can fall into a civil war from just needlessly expanding too rapidly. I did notice, however, that once you start progressing, it becomes very easy to stay on top. Since decadence is reduced when leveling up to a new tier, you can be very far ahead of everyone else if you choose to expand very little after reaching tier 2. Some factions already start on higher tiers, so the decadence hit may not mean much to them. Eventually, I came in contact with enemy tribes and decided to declare war on them once I had the strength to do so. Declaring war takes 1 turn before you can attack the enemy's territories. Once you begin the war, you can eliminate the nation outright by taking over every territory or negotiate a truce via the war score. Having a higher war score increases your negotiation odds. I rarely pursued this, as I mainly went for the pure annihilation route. Be warned though, a defeated tribe can still rise again if the right circumstances present themselves. Outside of war, diplomacy extends into peacetime as well. In this game, you have 3 main resources: gold, manpower, and metal. Each resource can be used for decisions, regional decisions, and creating units. They can also be traded with other nations for various benefits, such as setting up cooperation treaties, alliances, and whatever else you feel the faction can best serve you. The AI often sends trades and treaties as well, although I would read the fine print, as they try to fleece you more often than not. And I would say that the AI is one of the game's biggest weaknesses. For the Field of Glory battle system, they are pretty competent and will take advantage if you leave your flanks wide open. The problem comes in more on managing the territorial gains, which they seem to take for granted and crumble due to the civil war and poor planning. The AI will often lose its territory due to being in the bottom third or low loyalty, meaning I can swoop in once the territory becomes independent without having to declare a full-scale war. So ultimately, what is the goal of Field of Glory empires? Well, that's ultimately up to you to decide, but the end goal that the game states is to obtain more legacy points than the other factions. This reminds me of Victoria 2's scoring and trying to beat the other nations there, but it honestly doesn't matter much to me. I've yet to hit the 500-year turn limit on any of the campaigns, and I honestly don't have much incentive to do so. It's better to set your goals in this game, accomplish them, then move on to the next campaign. I always found that to be the best way to play these grand strategy games, and that would be my advice to you as well. When it comes to the presentation, whether it comes to the battles or just on the overworld, the game definitely lacks in the graphical department. However, I can usually forgive that for non-AAA titles. What I can't forgive, however, is the repetitive music that plays constantly. The game only has a handful of tracks to use, and you'll hear them over and over again. The sound effects used are fine, so it's a shame that the soundtrack falls so short. I would recommend to just mute the music and play some Total War Rome music or anything similar. It works very well, honestly. And if you ever get bored of your campaign, you can always just change your faction in the middle of it. This is a really cool feature as it lets you play as many of the emergent factions that don't appear until a certain date in the game has been reached or due to other factors such as rebellion. While I haven't done this too much with my campaigns, it's a great feature that I would like to see more games take advantage of. It gives an interesting opportunity to create an empire in one place, then do the same in another, and eventually have them battle it out. For some reason, this gives me some Romance of the Three Kingdoms vibes, as some of the games in that series allows you to betray one nation for another. The Persia DLC also offers an additional scenario to undertake that starts in the year 550 BCE and ends in the year 330 BCE. Playing as Cyrus the Great opens up unique opportunities to begin his conquest, but there are also a ton more factions to play with as well. It also provides a surprisingly rare opportunity to play as a very early Rome when they were still a monarchy. There are just a ton more ways to play with history here that are even less explored in other strategy games. Currently, I have a Macedon campaign going on when I allied with Athens and stomped out Sparta. I may be on a collision course with Persia, but I hope to delay that as much as possible. Other than that, it's the same game as I spoke about before, albeit in a different historical context. Overall, I can definitely recommend this title. Building your faction from the ground up is great to see. There's a wide variety of factions to play with, each featuring their own unique mechanics, and the Decadence mechanic is a nice take on the grand strategy formula. There's also some lack of polish in certain areas, but that's to be expected given this game's budget and being the first grand strategy game in the series. The only real caveat I have is in regards to combat. The turn-based combat is awesome, but you'll need Field of Glory 2 in order to access it. It can feel like a huge chunk of the game is missing without it. If you don't care for the combat, however, then feel free to buy Field of Glory Empires at full price. If you do want to experience the combat, I would recommend you to buy both of them on sale, so you are still getting the experience without having to fork over full price money. Either way, this is definitely a game to keep on your radar, especially if you enjoy Antiquity. Thank you guys for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.